Welcome to the channel, friends. So you're looking at the back of my C6 ZR1 where I have installed a Fore Systems fuel system, a return style fuel system on this car. And I want to go over the upgrades I've done over the past couple years after initially doing my first install video and kind of overview of the Fore Innovations fuel system. So you're looking at the back end of the Corvette right now inside the trunk. And I've removed the panel here in the back side of the hatch, and this is where I have my controller mounted, as you can see. Short distance to the battery. I did that because I wanted to minimize the heavy gauge wiring, the weight inside the car. So I'm talking about this wire right here. So I didn't want to put it on the other side or somewhere else in the car, and it would just add a ton of weight. So that's why it's located right next to the battery. A nice short 3 or 4 foot cable goes right straight to the battery. And then I've upgraded the alternator has a thicker wire going to the battery supply as well for other accessories on the car, like the Pro Speed fan, and to provide ample power to the fuse box in the engine bay. But I do not have an extra wire going to the battery from the alternator. I took a look at the gauge of the wire going from the battery box all the way to the back side of the battery here, and it's actually pretty thick. I don't need to upgrade that just yet. So I think it provides sufficient amperage and voltage to recharge the battery as the 4 dual pumps are working and drawing on the battery first, and then the alternator is going to charge the battery. I haven't had any issues with that setup. Like I said, I have not run a thicker cable front to back to help, support the actual, I think it's 40 amps per pump or whatever. I could be slightly wrong on that, but I know it's up there. It's definitely high amperage. But anyways, I want to go over the fuel pump selection first. So let's go over to my computer and bring up the Fore Innovations website. And I want to go through the available options when it comes to fuel pumps. And then after I go and explain why I chose the ones I did, I'm going to go and show you an overview of the whole car and inside the car where I've installed some switches to make my life easier if you're programming or taking data logs or reading or writing to the vehicle, I should say. So let's go to the computer and take a look at the fuel pump selection Fore offers you. Okay, so now we're at Fore Innovations website. I'm going to go ahead and go click on GM at the top and then go click on C5 and C6. And this is going to bring up a couple selections. We have dual pump, triple pump. So I'm going to go to dual pump just to be simple because that's what I have. The triple pump is going to be the same exact selection, but you'll have an extra pump to choose from. So on the next page, you're going to get this selection of 3 kind of kits. The L1, L2, L4. This first one is for 900 rear wheel fuel system. Now I think these are all for like race gas, levels, not for E85, but we'll get into that in a second. So this one's for like about 900. This one says 1200 plus for the L2. The main difference between these two is this uses the OEM fuel rails and adapts to that OEM system for your fuel rails and things like that. But the L2 is the more comprehensive one. Essentially, it's the same as the L4. This one here is going to be rated for 1200 plus rear wheel, which is, like I said, probably based on some kind of race gas. And this has the ability to run with aftermarket fuel rails. So this is the one I selected, is the L2. And these last two both, you want the fuel regulator mounted after the rails, as it says here. So you never want the fuel regulator mounted before the rails on a return style system. You want them mounted after. So if you were going for 1400 horsepower, rear wheel horsepower, then you would select the L4. But the one I have that I bought was the L2. So we're going to click on that one. And the same thing applies to all these other kits. So essentially, once you understand which pumps you need, which kits you need, it becomes very simple. So they're going to have, selection for ZR1, all other models, this and that. So we're just going to click on ZR1 because that's what we're talking about today. Then it asks you for the intake, the LS intake. That's going to be the OEM LSA/LS9 with tabs and without tabs. As you can see here, this one has those like ears in the backside of the blower. If you don't have tabs there, then you would you would check off here with tabs removed. But I'm just going to keep it simple, and we'll click on that one. My tabs are removed because I cut them off. But anyways, let's move along. Then it's going to ask you for like the fuel rails. You can, select the 4 fuel rails. I have the DSX fuel rails, which are really nice. They provide a ton of injector clearance. Those guys that have run the radium rails know exactly what I'm talking about. It crushes the connector on the fuel injector and doesn't provide enough clearance. So either I recommend the DSX #1, and then #2 would be the Fore Innovations billet rails. Those are the top 2 for the LS9. Next, fuel pump 1 and fuel pump 2. Okay, so this is where it gets tricky and people get confused. You're going to want to go click on this red little button here with a question mark. And this is going to bring up a selection of pumps. Okay, so if you're running pump gas, then you can select from the first 2. Okay, that's pump gas, gasoline pump only. So then the rest of these in the list here, from the TI 267 and on, those are E85 rated. So if you're running E85, you're going to want to select from these. Okay, so the main difference here now is this first one. So the TI 267, if you want to run more than 17 pounds of boost, if you're going to run more than that, I would select the next one. So the 274, this is the one I selected. So my primary is the 274, and then my secondary is this 285. Okay, if you're running 17 or less PSI of boost, you could go with the 267 here as your primary. But if you're running over 17, get the 274 as a primary. And then for your secondary, you have 2 options, the 285 or the 295. I went with the 285 because paired up with this 274, you have 900 liters per hour, if you can see here at the rating for the fuel. And that's on E85. It says right here, E85 rated. Okay, so you get 900 liters per hour. That's a ton of flow. I'm over 1,000 wheel, and I still have no problems with fuel on E85. So you would want to select the 295 if you're really pushing it past 1,100 for your secondary. So you want to select the 295 as your secondary pump. And that is just for race use only. It has no internal check valve. So there is a check valve that gets replaced. So on the ZR1, on the passenger side tank, there is a actual a regulator like check valve thing that has to get removed, and you replace it with the bypass that Fore provides you with. So that's something to think about. If you want to have a street car that runs good, no issues with fuel system, like when you go to start it, it gives you a big problem because of the fuel system pressure is just completely relieved and drained. That's something you're gonna want to think about. You're gonna want to go with that 274 as a primary and then 285 as a secondary. So the 285, the reason why you wouldn't want it as a primary is because it has 25% more heat than a 274. So that's not something you want to be constantly using as your primary. You can if you want, but just keep in mind that it's going to create more heat, and most likely it's going to wear out faster. So that's the reason why you select a 274 Ti for your primary, and then the 285 for secondary. Those right there are going to be your go-to pumps for your primary and secondary. These others are kind of other weird situations. So those are going to be your bulletproof pumps for a daily driven, street monster, I should say, with a return style fuel system. So that's what I recommend. That's what I went with, and I have no problems starting my car up or doing anything, doing pulls and not having enough fuel over 1,000 wheel. So that's what I recommend, and that's what I chose for my system. So let's go back to the car and go over the whole thing and show you the interior switches I've added and the rest of the system. All right, guys, so we're back here inside the car, and now let's go over the switches I've added to make my life easier, and possibly you might want to add it to your car to make your life easier, because if you ever read and write to the vehicle and you're doing that often like I am, you're going to want to turn off the actual pump so it doesn't cycle when you go to turn on your ignition to, like, you write to your vehicle or read to your vehicle. Okay, so I used to have a switch in the back, and I used to have to pop the trunk every time and hit the toggle switch so it would turn off the primary pump, that circuit that triggers it. Well, now I do it all from here. I basically ran a wire from the Fore controller in the back all the way down the center of the console here, you know, through the trunk, through the center of the console, and now everything's hooked up on this switch cluster. So I have fuel pump 1 and I have fuel pump 2. Now, this makes it easy for me to switch this primary off and on right from here. If I'm sitting here with a laptop doing stuff in the car, I can go ahead and just turn it off, because I want to demonstrate for you guys what happens. So in a normal state, this is going to be on. So when I go to hit my start, you can hear the primary cycling. Okay, that's the normal operation. Now I can turn that off. Now it's dead quiet. We don't have a fuel pump cycling, and you're not burning up your battery and consuming all sorts of power on your car, which is important. You don't want to be consuming power when you're trying to read and write. You want to have the thing actually hooked up to a 25 amp charger while you're doing that type of activity. Okay, so then let's move on to the second switch, which is the fuel pump 2, so the secondary pump. Now, this allows me to test my secondary pump right from here, which is actually kind of handy, because you want to make sure that your secondary is working, because if you ever have the situation where it's not working, it will actually make your engine go extremely fucking lean, and then you're going to have a blown engine. Okay, so that's why I want to have this here to test my secondary, and it's just extremely convenient for me. All right, so let's go ahead and test this. I have the start switch on, and I'm going to go turn on the main fuel pump, and then now turn on the second one. As you can see, it lit up, and I can hear it turn on as well. That's the main important thing here. Let's turn it off. Just listen. You can hear that extra flow. So that secondary is working. This essentially is energized by this circuit here, and it throws 12 volts to that pump. It's just like a manual override to test the pump. Okay, this light is not going to turn on when the secondary turns on. It's just a mere way to activate that pump to make sure it still works. That's all it is. This other switch here is for the Casper Electronics low high speed override, manual override for the fan. This will it turns off and on, high and low, the fan as desired. So that's good for staging and things like that. But anyways, that's what the fuel pump switches do. Like I said, extremely convenient, and it's something you really want in your Fore install, because you're going to be, you know, when you're plugging into the HP tuners, you're going to want to turn off that pump, especially if you have a return style fuel system, and not have the thing activated and constantly draining your battery out, because you most likely will end up with a dead battery if you stay in the car more than a minute or so with the thing running. So that's what I did on the interior. Let's go off and check out the rest of the car. All right, guys, so let's start here in the back of the car. This is where I have the Fore controller mounted. I mounted it here because, like I said, easy access to the battery, and it's a short distance for the cables. And I use a minimal length cable here for the positive and negative to the battery. The fuse block is also mounted right here. If you can see the laser pointer, there's the fuse block right there. So you have your fuse, and then that goes to the positive side of the battery. But right here is a really good location. I can clearly see the controller box, and I can clearly see the wires, how they're inputted. Some people put this controller in weird spots, like inside the cubby for the OEM fuel controller module. It's kind of tight down there. You can't really see what the hell's going on. I'd rather have it up where I can see it, and it's easy access. All I have to do is remove this carpeted panel here, and I have it right here and do whatever I need to do. So I used to have that switch mounted over here in this corner, that on-off switch for the fuel pump. But like I said, I relocated it to the center console now in the switch cluster. But this controller has relays, and it also has fuses for each pump. So if you ever blow a fuse, not only can it be this fuse here for the main supply for power, but it can also be the individual fuse for each pump. And you just need to like remove, open this up, unscrew this, and open up the cover, and you'll see it. But that's what's inside the controller, is fuses and relays and other stuff like the circuit board. But anyways, I run power to the controller, and then you're going to have power cables going to each pump. So the power cable for each pump is right here. Follow my green laser pointer, and it goes along the back side of this wall and across this way through this trunk latch assembly here, mechanism, and it wraps around the back side here, all tucked in nicely, wire loomed and zip tied together, so it's out of the way, nothing's dangling. And then it wraps around this way, and then it goes through the body, and it goes down to the filler neck. Okay, so along the filler neck, and then to the actual fuel hat, the fuel pump assembly, I should say. So then the fuel pump assembly is going to have, a return and a feed line coming out of it, and that goes up the fuel neck just like the wires went down it. Right, there's plenty of space in that area. I'm not going to go over the install of the whole process with the tank, but that's because that's a huge pain in the ass. The people that know how that goes, it's a freaking nightmare. But just pray that you don't break any parts in the crossover tube, because that's usually going to happen. I was lucky I didn't break any parts, but I thought I did in the process when I was disassembling it. But anyways, I have the return lines, which are both -8 lines, come up and out the fuel neck area. Then it comes down right here underneath the door. It's all behind this panel right here. So once you remove this inner fender panel, you will have access to like that whole area where the filler neck is, and you can see that. So it comes down, goes along the bottom of the door here on the driver's side, and it comes up, and then the line comes out right there. If you can see it, I'm shining the light on it, the laser on it, right above the brake master cylinder. And then it goes up over the blower, behind the blower, and then to the other side. So you normally don't see the fuel line cross over the blower. They usually try to attach it to this side, of the driver's side fuel rail somehow. Well, I have this crazy kind of like elaborate setup. You're putting 10 pounds of shit in a 1 pound package. So there's not a lot of room when you're modifying all this stuff, adding aftermarket fuel system, all this other stuff. So you have to become creative in where you're going to put your fuel regulator, which is right here. My hob switch is right here. And then I have my E85 sensor, flex fuel sensor, right down here on the return side after the fuel regulator. But anyways, let's follow this line. So it comes from underneath the door, snakes up through here above the brake master cylinder, then to the other side. I also use Teflon line in the braided steel line, so that way it's a forever line. It's not like you have to replace it every 5 to 7 years like some other lines, which is something you need to consider. Buy the Teflon internal coated lined fuel hose, and you'll be all set for life. You don't have to worry about it leaking and like breaking down and all this other shit. So buy the good stuff. Buy Vibrant. Everything I installed on here is either Vibrant, the fittings are Vibrant, and the lines are Vibrant performance. So let's follow this to the other side. So it goes behind the blower. Goes behind the blower, then it tucks down underneath this upper intercooler tank, ice tank, and then we have here the line. So it's actually underneath. So if you run it underneath here, It's kind of like a mess, a maze of wires, but and hoses. But underneath here, it hits the Fore Innovations flow check valve. So you can see it says flow in that direction. So it goes this way, does a 180, goes into the injector dynamics fuel filter system. I went with this system because I can easily drain my gas or E85 easily right from here. All I have to do is put a special adapter on this Schrader port and then run a hose right to a gallon bucket here, container, fuel container, and drain it right from here. Makes it super easy. And I can also remove the cartridge style filter right from this location. I don't have to pull my fender off, do all sorts of weird freaking shenanigans to check my my fuel filter. So it goes into the fuel filter. Then this is the output of the fuel filter right here. Goes back over, does the same kind of loop underneath the intercooler tank. Then it goes right into this line right here is the line we just followed. Then it goes right into the passenger side fuel rail right there. Okay, so it's a 90-degree fitting, and it goes right into the DSX fuel rails. Then I have this special crossover I made. Okay, that goes across the snout, right above the snout, and crosses over to the other side. Crosses over to the other side here, to the driver's side fuel rail. Then we have another 90-degree fitting. Follow the line right here to the regulator. The regulator and everything in the hob switch right here are all hooked up with the high boost line. So that's not a silicone line, that's actually a pneumatic line, like a hard pneumatic line with special fittings for that type of line. So it can handle high boost. I'm running 25 PSI, so if you go over 15, I recommend using this hard line versus the soft line. But anyways, it hits the regulator, comes out of the regulator, and then I have my flex fuel sensor, which is right underneath here on the return side. And then once it goes out the flex fuel sensor, it goes back under the brake master cylinder, back this way underneath the door, back down the fuel filler neck area, and then back into the tank. So that's the complete loop on the system. As you can see, I have my fuel gauge. I relocated it to the fuel line, the fuel rail right here. It used to be on the regulator, but I found it to be very cramped in this area. So that's why I took it off the regulator and put it on the fuel rail instead. But like I said, that's a summary of the Fore Innovations dual pump return style fuel system. I used a Teflon line, I used 4 fittings, and I used vibrant fittings and hose. Use the Teflon stuff because that way it lasts forever. Don't use some bullshit soft line or any other kind of line that's not braided. They make braided line that doesn't have the Teflon, but that's for use for other stuff, like for oil, for coolants, for anything else. But for fuel lines, you want something that's rated, it's going to last. If you're not using stainless steel lines like the factory does, you must, I think you must use the Teflon line to be safe, be safer than sorry, honestly, to make it last. But that's going to be the fuel system, guys. Like I said, another tip when it comes to installing this, you're going to want to mount the hob switch in this kind of manner, off the engine, okay? It is recommended in the actual instructions to mount it off the engine, because if you mount it on the engine like I did at first, the engine vibrations when it's revving up will actually disturb the continuity on the switch, on the hob switch, and shut your fuel system off and on, your secondary. So in order to avoid vibrations fucking with your hob switch, you have to rubber mount it or something off the engine like I did here. I mounted it off the power steering res mount here. I made a custom bracket, and then I have it all kind of mounted up and rubber mounted and looking really nice. So that way I don't have ever any issues when it comes to fuel cutting off because of vibrations, the harmonics, or the actual interaction of the engine to the hob switch. So very important to isolate that hob switch. Another thing is make sure you install that check valve before the filter on the supply side because if you don't you install that check valve, you will lose pressure, some pressure, when you go to shut the car off and it sits for a while. So that's another thing I want to cover. When I cycle the car on, the very first time it's been sitting for a while, I have to like let the thing run for like 5 seconds so it like gets all the air out of the system. It just helps it out, and then it starts right up. Okay, but I usually don't have any problems after that. The car will fire right up if I shut it down. Like if I go for a drive and I go to turn it back on, it's right on. Like it starts right up. So that's not a problem. Like I said, very handy for you to have the filter. Like the injector or dynamics filter system that I have here, mounted somewhere that you can easily access, because it makes life easy to not only look at the gauge on here to see how the filter's doing, but also that port to drain fuel. Very important. It makes life extremely easy. You don't have to rig up some crazy system to drain fuel out of your tank. So as you can see, I wrapped my lines with a heat shielding material, heat sleeve. Well, that helps mitigate like the heat soak a little bit. Of course, if this thing sits for a while, like you go to run the car for half an hour, and then you let it sit for like 20 minutes, it's gonna bake. Okay, there's nothing that's gonna prevent heat soak once you have the car sitting with the hood closed. So this, while the car is in motion, it does help out. So it keeps all the fluids cool, whether it's the intercooler fluid for the supercharger or the fuel system itself. There's a lot of heat being generated off these headers, so I wanted to make sure that I wrap these fuel lines and keep as much heat away as possible. But that's the fuel system in a nutshell. If you guys have any other questions or comments, please place them right down below. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.